Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is a meeting of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, September 27. The time is now 2 minutes past 7. The first item on our agenda is the roll call. Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Joe Murphy is absent. Paul Jordan.
Here.
Robin Pothier.
Here.
Peter DiStefano is absent. Elizabeth Karp is absent. And Maria Mack is here. Our next agenda item is the consent agenda. This consists of approval of minutes, August 10th, 2022 work session, August 23rd, 2022 regular session, request for extension of preliminary plan approval, major land development project, Wakefield Alzheimer's Care Facility, minor subdivision preliminary plan review, Hope Springs LLC, and the report of the administrative officer. Are there any corrections or changes to the consent agenda? If none, I'd entertain a motion for approval.
Motion to approve the consent agenda?
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second from Susan. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Our next agenda item is a request for reduction in performance bond, major subdivision comprehensive permit, the village at Curtis Corner. Is there anyone representing the applicant? Yes. Okay. That is later on in our agenda, but we can certainly address that.
Just for clarity, Madam
Certainly.
Chair, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director. With regards to the agenda item associated with the Village at Curtis Corner, I think that agenda item will be brief. You do have a staff memo and recommendation from both the Town Planning Director and the Town Engineer in favor of the surety reduction from the 514 to just over 200, roughly a 50% reduction.
Make that motion.
Certainly. We have a motion relative to the performance bond reduction request. Does everyone have that in front of them?
South Kingstown Planning Board hereby reduces the previously established performance bond by $275,000. As such, the existing performance bond is reduced from $514,214.62 to $239,214.62. Said bond must be modified to the satisfaction of the town's finance department prior to the release of such surety.
Madam Chair, just for clarity, I think Mr. Jordan said $239.
Did, and he meant to
Instead
say
of 239,000.
239,000.
100,000?
239, right.
Okay.
I stand corrected. Thank you.
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second from Susan. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Our next agenda item is the public hearing advisory development plan review for Silver Spring Marina. Jay has indicated that there is a request to continue.
Yes, Madam Chair, the applicant has asked to continue the application. They're working on addressing some of the comments made by TRC, as well as working with the building department on the height of the overall proposed. So they had asked for another month just so they can get the revisions complete.
Thank you, Jay. So we need a motion to continue this if the board is in agreement to our October meeting, which is, do you have a date?
25th.
What was that?
25.
25th.
Motion to continue to our next regular meeting on October 25th.
We have a motion from Paul to continue this item to our next regular meeting on October 25th, 2022. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second from Susan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next agenda item is a public hearing, major subdivision, flexible design residential project preliminary plan, Northwood subdivision.
So, Madam Chair, just for clarity on this, this is scheduled for a public hearing. We initially moved this project along, waiting for some additional paperwork and revisions and support documentation. We did not receive that information prior to setting the agenda for this hearing. Since that time, that application was deemed incomplete. As an incomplete application, it was our recommendation that the public hearing cannot proceed. So it's our recommendation, again, to suspend the proceedings associated with this application as it relates to the public hearing. If the public hearing is suspended, as recommended by staff, the continuation of that hearing, or the restart up, I won't say continuation, the restart up of that hearing, we would recommend new legal notices associated with that as required by Rhode Island law.
Amy, could you just inform the board the difference between suspending something and continuing something?
Continuing something would mean that there would be no requirement to renotice. Suspending it, I would say, is continuing it with renotice.
Thank you. Are there questions for Amy or for staff?
And I would just note, any deadlines that were running, I would think are no longer in effect since the application has been certified incomplete.
Jamie, has the applicant been made aware of this?
Yes, they have, Madam Chair.
So we would need a motion from the board to vote to suspend this application, correct?
Yes, and I would suggest that when the public hearing resumes, we can reiterate for the benefit of the public that the public hearing that began in August and was suspended in September is now open. And obviously, the public will have an opportunity to comment on anything new that was submitted. In addition to, I would say they can reiterate comments that were made in August.
Just out of curiosity, folks that are here for this project, show of hands? Would someone like to make a motion then to suspend this project?
I'll make that motion. I also have a question. Do you have an estimate for the folks who are in the audience of when this might reappear? Or do we know that at all?
So one of the bigger ticket items on their completeness check was a documentation from DEM in regards to the wetland permitting and drainage. They have received that, but there are some other smaller items that they need to complete. It's entirely up to them how they do it. It could return next month. Their intention is to get moving on this and be done with it, so it wouldn't be far-fetched to expect that it may. Taking that back, because
Public notice.
is going to require 4 weeks. So unless they get complete this week, it would most likely not be ready for the October 25th.
I do recall we had asked for revisions to the landscape plan as well. That was one of the major points of discussion. So we have a motion from Susan. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Paul. Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Next agenda item is a public hearing, development plan review, South County Healthcare System. Is there anyone representing the applicant? Good evening, Mr.
Madam
Evans.
Chair. Should I proceed, Madam
You
Chair?
certainly should, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this evening and present our institutional master plan. As you know, we've been working through a process together for, since I've been involved the past 18 months, and tonight we're pleased to be before you to submit the institutional master plan for your review and consideration. We think the plan that we've submitted complies with the ordinance which the town has adopted in response to the concerns that we had expressed previously about the prior ordinance. The plan has been reviewed by the Technical Review Committee. They asked a number of questions, and we provided supplemental information in response to the questions which they submitted. The master plan, which I'm sure you've all had an opportunity to review, was submitted pursuant to Section 603 of the town's ordinance, and the plan details the improvements that South County Health wants to make to the campus in the coming years. Those plans include the improved campus parking, additional procedural space within the existing buildings, renovation of the medical office building, renovating the west side entrance of the property, developing an above-ground connector walkway from the medical office building to the Frost Pavilion, replacing climate control infrastructure, expanding oxygen storage, reviewing and modernizing and renovating the radiology, cardiac catheterization, and other facilities within the hospital, renewing and renovating the emergency department, improving the diagnostic imaging facilities within the hospital, and all of those improvements will be made inside existing buildings that are on the campus. We'll also have submitted a comprehensive parking analysis as part of the plan, and the goal of this plan is to bring the hospital facilities and upgrade them so that we can meet the demands of the patients who live and work and visit in South County. So that has been the focus of the institution for the past 18 months, because it's the only independent community hospital remaining in our state, and the entire focus of the Board of Trustees, the management of the hospital, and all of the employees who work there is to try to make South County the best community hospital in the United States. And they try to do that every single day. And there are many, many challenges, as all of you know, in the past several years in terms of operating and managing successfully a hospital. With all of the financial issues that are faced by healthcare institutions and all of the issues that they faced with COVID, they've done a remarkable job of continuing the focus on improving the quality of all the services that are available at the hospital. So this evening we have a number of people here who've worked with us as consultants who'll be happy to answer any questions that you have or that the public may direct to you in the portion of the hearing when they get to express their concerns. And those people include Scott Lindgren and Robert Clinton, who are both senior project managers at VHB. Sean Green from NEMD Architects, and they specialize in architecture for hospitals and healthcare institutions. And Joe Lombardo, who's our planning consultant. And I'm pleased to say that this evening we have a number of hospital administrators and board members here. And with your permission, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Joe Matthews, who's the chairman of the board of the hospital, who's a Wakefield resident and a Rhode Island business owner and president, to come forward and talk to you for a few minutes about the hospital's goals and objectives in submitting this master plan to you for your consideration, and also for him to introduce the other members of the senior hospital team who are here with him this evening. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Joseph Matthews, and I'm honored to be the board chair of South County Health, Board of Trustees. And I'd like to introduce you to some of my fellow trustees that are here tonight. Jim Farrell, could you raise your hand? Jim Farrell is our vice chair, and also he's the chair of finance and investment. Jason Marshall. Jason Marshall is our nomination and governance chair. I'd like to also introduce to you members of the executive leadership team, and I will say in no particular order, just the ones closest to me.
Just make sure you don't drift too far away from the mic so that we can...
Surely. Want to make sure. Tom, could you just stand up? It'll be easier, because you're taller than I am. Tom Breen is our Chief Financial Officer. Andrew Prescott is our General Counsel. Ian Clark is our Vice President of Strategy and Performance Excellence. He's the guy who crunches a lot of numbers for us so that we know statistically our accuracy. Aaron Robinson is our Chief Executive Officer. I got to get this right. It's Robert. David, I'm close. David, please stand up. David is very important. David is our property manager that handles all and has been a key component of interaction with the community for us. Anitra Galmore is our Chief Operating Officer and our Chief Nursing Officer. We got everything covered. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to address 3 items. The first is we're part of the community. And we understand that being a part of the community is being a good neighbor. And we have been working very closely with the folks that live in our immediate areas. Dave has done a great job. He's been our primary point of contact for our neighbors in addressing issues as diverse as lighting, when we remove garbage in the garbage trucks, and not inconsequentially parking. And the executive leadership team has come up with methods to try to be as good a neighbor as we can. In June of this year, we had a workshop inviting neighbors that expressed concerns to come and listen to some of our plans and for us to listen to their concerns and to try and incorporate that into some of the things that you now see. The second item that I want to make sure that we clearly address is parking. We've done everything we can to address parking issues. South County Health is probably the second or third largest employer in the town of South Kingston. We employ about 1,700 folks, from management to physicians, to frontline staff, to pharmacists, to transporters, to food service. And we have struggled mightily as we try to grow our business here in South County to provide appropriate parking, not just for our employees and our clients, our patients, but also for our vendors and for our visitors. It's been an enormous, enormous challenge. And you're aware of the efforts that we're working on to do it. One of the reasons that, and this goes to my final point, one of the reasons that parking is so critical for us is because the population in Rhode Island for the last 50 years has been 1 million people. And so if you want to grow your business in healthcare, you are growing your business at the expense of somebody else. And for us to remain viable and sustainable, we are the only birthing center in Washington County. For us to remain viable and to serve our communities, we need to be able to grow our business and invest in the technology and the talent that will allow us to serve our communities and to be able to afford enough of a profit so that we can offset the expenses that we have in non-profitable business lines. One of the things that we learned through the process of the episodes of COVID is the behavioral health issue that we have to address here in Washington County. You may or may not be aware of the fact that of the 5 counties in Rhode Island, Washington County has the highest suicide rate in the state. It has the highest attempted teenage suicide rate in the state. And we see it every day in our emergency department. I round with Aaron Robinson at least once a month we always make sure that we stop in the emergency department. And on any given day, I've seen as many as 5 to 9 behavioral health cases where we essentially have to maintain them in a safe environment until they either sober up or they're able to be transported up north to Butler Hospital. They can be there for days. They've been there for weeks. And we are not compensated adequately for any of those. And so for us to underwrite this massive expense and growing expense, we have to be able to maintain profitable service lines in other areas. And we have invested heavily with the support of the Board of Trustees. Let's talk about a cancer center, which is critical to have as a community service. We have invested over $4.5 million in a linear accelerator that will treat radiation, will provide radiation treatments that is very specific, highly focused, and addresses the most immediate tumor areas with precision. You have to go as far as East Greenwich to get that service to the east, and to the west you have to go all the way to Waterford, Connecticut. So we see ourselves as a support service for the entire Washington County area. And these are the kind of commitments that we make as a community hospital. And to that end, we are one of only 19 hospitals, healthcare systems in the entire United States that is recognized by CMS as 5-star quality and 5-star patient satisfaction. This plan that we are asking for your approval on is so that we can continue forward the legacy of quality excellence for the next generation. So I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I don't have anything else to add at this time. I am expecting that you're going to open it up to the public hearing at some point.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be here to answer any questions as the process moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, is there anything from staff as it relates to this master plan? I know that staff has been over the plan in detail, as discussed in previous meetings. Anything that you wish to add?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director. I think our review primarily revolves around a clear understanding of the expansions or reconfigurations internal to the hospital and external to the hospital, and their relationship with their parking demands, and clarifying how that is accomplished through the next 5 years. I know in their plan there's a substantial investment in a proposed parking lot on Town Farm, the Town Farm property. That requires a few other moving parts, primarily action by the Town Council. That subject matter jurisdiction is not the purview of the Planning Board. It requires actions by others. But again, it is a component of their master plan that they're relying heavily on. There is correspondence and clarification we received on September 16th regarding their ability to potentially add another 25 spaces internal to the campus associated with a tear down of their storage shed building, but we don't have any schematics for that. I spoke to the hospital about that, and in the configuration of that statement that 25 spaces could be accommodated, I believe they have some schematic plans that they may be able to provide to the planning board, shortly. Not this evening, but shortly, so that we can better evaluate the impact of those proposed 25 spaces. Again, there are a lot of moving parts within their sections, as Attorney Revin said, as well as Mr. Matthews, with regards to their ability to grow. And as they grow, there are slight modifications to their parking demands and kind of travel demands and their ability to handle customers in and out the door. And, you know, my concern is at what point during the process does their 94% capacity parking lot, due to, by their own admission and their parking analysis, become overwhelmed with slight revisions internal? So again, we'd like to advance the discussion with the hospital to seek more clarity on that expansion as it relates to parking. Understanding that their existing footprint for their building is extremely limited. Their existing footprint for their parking is limited without a potential acquisition of additional land. Their only other option would be to go vertical. It's our understanding that that is not financially feasible at this time. And again, that brings up additional amount of issues associated with how do you displace surface parking lot during the construction of a significant parking structure versus the addition of acreage. So again, we have, I want to say, minor technical items associated with, you know, what are the results of expansion plans A, B, and C that do recognize the need for additional parking, and at what point do those expansion plans need to be halted without bringing Town Farm online? And, you know, I'm not 100% clear on that. I know there are sentences and statements and paragraphs that allude to how that will be handled. Their primary fallback, from my perspective, reading their master plan, would be if they don't have parking on the campus, they haven't added acreage for parking or constructed new parking, they would have to rely on shuttle and off-site parking. And again, that is something that is allowed under the zoning regulations and mentioned in the institutional master plan. So if for some reason, I'll give a quick example, if their parking needs went to 50 and they could accommodate 25 on site, 25 spaces need to occur somewhere. If those were leased from an entity and that facility was allowed to be a parking lot that could be leased in the town, they would be compliant with their institutional master plan. But we would, during any permitting process for building, we would need verification that they were addressing that parking. So again, it's just working through that a little bit with the hospital on what the statements that we need to be comfortable with in the institutional master plan, and a clear understanding of what their expectations are as they move forward with their building program. Because they're in place to spend a significant amount of capital, and I'd like to resolve this earlier than 6 months from now when they're ready to put a shovel in the ground and someone says, wait, what about your parking? What about the lease? What about having enough spaces? If we can spend the time to do that now, I think you'll get that back 3- or 4-fold during the permitting process in the future. So again, those are our primary issues. But again, I think the layout of the master plan is a substantial improvement from their prior submission. To me, it reads not 100% better, but 1,000% better than their prior submission. So I would give them some kudos with regards to the team they put together to do this plan versus the last plan. And that's what we have for the moment.
And Jamie, what is your sense of how the additional information as far as how the parking would proceed in terms of design and capacity relative to this plan? It seems as though the request to approve the plan is a blanket request, so to speak, and I know that in previous conversations with the board, one of the items that we did inquire about, but there was not a large amount of, or an extensive amount of discussion related to the town farm parking. It was essentially the other areas that could be added or modified.
Right, and I think part of it may be graphic, the 25 space expansion, I think, is a graphic or schematic issue that can be resolved with a submission on where it goes and how it goes there. But with regards to the other things, they're saying they can add 25 plus or minus spaces to the campus. Those 25 spaces will limit the amount of building permits that can be issued for internal retrofits or renovations that increase the demand for parking. And I think there needs to be a clear statement within that the hospital understands that their capacity is limited by their ability to supply spaces internal to their property. And once they maximize their internal ability to provide spaces, they have two alternatives in their institutional master plan. One alternative is to shuttle. The second alternative is to bring Town Farm online. One, you could say, is they may have more control of, and that's the shuttle. But in discussions with the hospital, finding satellite parking that meets either our town, being South Kingstown, or an abutting town's zoning requirements is not as easy as it may sound. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the Town Farm parcel disposition is decided by others. The town council still has to make a motion to make that transaction happen, and then the hospital still has to do a complete design of that parking lot. I can tell you that the plan that they submitted with their institutional master plan, on its face value, doesn't appear to coincide completely with the requirements of our landscaping regulations as it relates to internal landscape islands. So again, they're looking at, I think, 146 total net spaces. And again, please bear with me, I'm going from memory of a 200-page document. So 146 spaces, but if a few islands eat up that, there may only be 140. But again, their goal of bringing Town Farm online takes their 94% capacity in their parking demands down to the mid-80s. And again, depending on the yield of that parking lot, 84, 85, 86%, which in essence means that when you visit the hospital, you are not driving around and around and around looking for a parking space, that there is capacity at those peak periods. At 94+% capacity, you almost want to say that that's at capacity, because that means when you approach a site of 1,000 spaces, there's only 60 left at 94% capacity. And you're going to drive around for a while to find those 60 spaces. And the tendency in that scenario is people will park in undesignated spots, which affects traffic flow, which is especially concerning for a hospital. So again, being able to operate in that lower 80% tier allows them to be much more functionally efficient and provides them a better ability in an emergency setting to accommodate that circulation. So again, I think there's a mix of wording, schematics, and a clear aspect that says until Town Farm comes online, we have two options available to us. Capacity that's limited to our internal footprint, or we're going to have to shuttle. I know the hospital, and they do mention it in their institutional master plan, and there's, I believe it's in their September 16th supplement, that they are shuttling today to alleviate some of the pressures associated with construction projects ongoing presently. That will continue during their retrofit of the medical office building. The medical office building retrofit does not have a net effect on parking demand, but it will have a net effect during construction on the availability of parking spaces. So again, during that construction, again, they may bring some more spaces online internal, or they will have to shuttle more and utilize more off-site parking. So again, it's a mix from my perspective.
So with this institutional master plan that has been developed and a modified procedure, so to speak, so that the hospital can make changes internally to the site as they deem appropriate, how then does an approval of this plan as a whole limit or not, or does it allow the town to have additional input, particularly with regard to parking?
So, and again, that's probably a paragraph or two that's missing from the plan, is playing through that scenario of the permitting process. So the institutional master plan is laid out, in essence, to allow the hospital to develop this plan so that they can expedite the next aspect of their permitting. And an example of that would be, to me, this is the simplest example. If they were to add an operating room, and for discussion purposes, the addition of that operating room meant that 20 more people were needed per hour, either people coming through that or support staff and associating with that operating room. They would need to accommodate those parking spaces. When they go to apply for a building permit, according to the institutional master plan, they would have to submit a document associated with that construction as it relates to their parking demand and how they are meeting that demand. In my example, if they said, we're going to bring 25 spaces online internal to the campus, and those 25 spaces were referenced in the institutional master plan, a building permit could be issued. Building permit gets issued, you know where that parking is going on the campus, general location, you know a general schematic associated with that and the potential impacts for that. A year from now, they try and do another operating room, and it requires another 25 spaces. There are no more spaces internal to the hospital. So when they applied for the building permit to do the OR, that required 25 additional spaces, they would have to submit a plan for how they're going to meet the demand of the 25 spaces. From my perspective, it's not taking their parking ratio at 94% capacity and stretching it to 99. That they have to accommodate those 25 additional spaces, which potentially, and we've had these conversations, would require them to shuttle more employees from off-site to free up spaces for visitors utilizing the hospital space. But it wouldn't be, hey, we're just allowed to shuttle. Every building permit would trigger their submission of how they're dealing with parking. That would be reviewed as it relates to whether or not it's incorporated in their institutional master plan. And if it is, they can move forward. If it isn't, it may require a revision. At some point, they may be limited by capacity, internal or external to their campus, without bringing Town Farm online.
So the review that would be triggered by the application for the building permit, what level of review would that be?
And again, my recommendation would be in any conditional approval you would make, that it's clear, that I don't want to say you're delegating that, but within your framework of permitting, it's the administrative officer, which under South Kingstown ordinance is the planning director, and that is done in consultation with the town engineer, public service director, and town council.
So none of these changes would come before the board or be subject to any kind of public hearing?
And again, it's magnitude. I believe, and Mr. Parker will correct me because he's my permitting expert and guru, but the complete redo of Town Farm, because there's no established use there, and again, I think we need to vet that permitting process clearly. But that may come back under DPR. But again, the intent of the institutional master plan is to give them a path
Understood.
to that, almost, not, I don't want to say certainty, but gives them the ability, because it's included in their master plan, that that parking lot goes there. You may be debating how many islands it has or how big the detention basin is, but you're not debating the use of that land as a parking lot.
Right, so I want the board and the public to be clear that you said a complete redo of the town farm park, if that were to occur, would need a review. And would that also be internally staff, or would that come back before?
At a minimum, it's internal. I'll defer to council on process there.
I think, and I think the assumption on which the IMP was submitted is that the land swap is going to happen. If it doesn't, the hospital is going to need to come back before the board and submit an amendment to the IMP.
Okay, so if the board were to approve this master plan as written, does that imply any kind of tacit approval of the town farm plan without?
It couldn't, because only the council can make that decision.
So just for clarity on that, their institutional master plan is saying for us to expand, we need an additional parking lot, and we're proposing to build it at location A. Location A still has to be vetted by the town council. If town council said no, back up, it would be hard pressed for them to go to the town council and say, we have approval for a parking lot there. They don't have approval for a parking lot there. They only have approval for a plan to expand into that location if others deem it appropriate, and that being the town council.
Thanks, Jamie. Questions for staff?
I do. I think, want to clarify what you're saying, that our approval of this plan is essentially a wholesale approval of all the items in the plan, that we can't parse out any portions of it that we are uncomfortable with. It's an all-or-nothing thing. And so we are giving our approval to every item here, so that each item can then be potentially, I forgot the word you used, but it could be expedited without being revisited by this board. So for example, if they want to change the sign out front, if it's in this plan, it'll be expedited without us having any conversations about that.
Yeah, anything in the IMP the board doesn't want to approve, you don't have to approve that portion of the IMP.
Okay, thank you. So we can parse out a part of this if we choose that we're not comfortable with. And then that would not hold up the entire package. It could. Sorry, there's muttering going on over here.
I'm sorry, I'll wait for my turn, but we're way off track as to what the plan is, and I was hoping I could get it.
Mr. Evans,
Correct.
we have a board member who's asking a question of council, please. Thank you.
I think if there are any aspects of the IMP the board isn't willing to approve, you can approve the IMP and not approve those specific aspects. They should be listed in the decision, and the reasons for denial should be indicated.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could just expand upon that. If there is a specific section you are uncomfortable with or have concerns about, I would express those so that you could give the hospital as the applicant an opportunity to address them versus sitting silent and then a month from now saying, I'm concerned about X. The hospital has been very forthcoming in this last process of trying to address staff's concerns as well as planning board's concerns. So I think tonight, as I mentioned earlier, is a very appropriate time to, if you have anxiety about something or concerns about the wording, to give the hospital an opportunity to be able to react and address those in a potential revision to their institutional master plan.
That's fair enough, thank you. So just furthering that question, so each item in here may or may not come back before the planning board. It may be just an administrative approval, or it might come to us. Do we know how to discern the difference between those two items? Like which ones we would see again and which ones we will not see again?
Again, I'll restate the intent. The intent of the master plan is to expedite the permitting process. So again, it's not traditional like a grocery store, or we just went through Dollar General, where they're applying within a zone and you have full review and autonomy in the review. They're giving you an institutional master plan, so their path to permit is straight to zoning without an additional potential review by the planning board. This is your review now.
Okay, thank you.
And Jamie, as Amy expressed the fact that if there are sections that the board is not comfortable with and we express them to the hospital, then those portions of the institutional master plan could either be revised or not included in a specific motion. Correct.
My suggestion would be to articulate those this evening and give the hospital an example. I mean, it's the elephant in the room, but if someone said, I'm not comfortable ever approving an institutional master plan that includes a parking lot on Town Farm Road, that becomes a very difficult position for the hospital to be in. I would try and articulate what makes you uncomfortable about that and what would make you more comfortable if that parking lot was located there. Is it the number, the setbacks, the landscaping, the format of that parking versus I don't want it there? That's a decision of the council because it's under their control for land. And if they don't want it there or want the hospital to expand, they would not be entertaining a transaction with the hospital. So I'm sorry to, we got to bring that to the forefront versus just
Well,
not
as you know,
discussing that.
yes, this board doesn't generally sit silently by, so.
Yeah.
Mr. Revens?
Madam Chair, first, the item that I passed out was emailed to the town late this afternoon, might have been after business hours. That's the proposed layout if you demoed the storage building where the 25 parking spaces could be added to the campus. Secondly, this is an institutional master plan. It's our plan. And my understanding of the law is, and I hope the planner and the solicitor and I are on the same page, is the plan has to comply with the master plan ordinance. It's not a menu in a restaurant where you can choose one entree and one salad and no dessert and no drink. It doesn't mean we can't make and consider any changes that the board wants to make. But when we go to implement the plan, we're in the same position that every other property owner in South Kingstown is in. We can't replace a window in a building without a building permit. We can't change an office to an examining room without a building permit. We can't add anything that requires a demolition permit, a building permit, development plan review, zoning approval, town council approval, whatever that may be, to carry out the plan. We have to come back like everybody else does and apply to the proper town agency. And that agency, whether that's you as the planning board, or whether that's the building official or the zoning board or the town council, they make those decisions, whoever that agency is. So that this plan doesn't mean that we can go ahead and implement all of these steps. We can only do that with the proper permits. So as those steps occur, we will, of course, submit the proper applications, and in some cases that would come to you. In other cases it wouldn't. But that's not your decision to decide where we have to go to get a permit. Those decisions are already made by the existing ordinance, and that's up to the respective boards or departments of the town to review the application and issue the permit. So I think there's some misunderstanding here that A, we can go and do whatever we want that's in the plan if you approve it, just as we see fit, which is not accurate. We can't. And secondly, that you can take out chunks of it and say, for example, that you can't put a parking lot on Town Farm Road. That's not before you tonight. And you don't have any authority to do that. If we wanted to, if we buy a piece of property, just like any of you buy it, and it needs a zone change, we have to apply for it. If it needs development plan review, we have to apply for it. If it needs zoning approval, we have to apply for it. So that would all take place in those individual processes that would occur as those things go forward. And we also have the right under the ordinance at any time that it's appropriate to file a request for you to consider an amendment to the master plan. So all this is an outline of what we think our best efforts, and as the planner said, it was a Herculean effort to put this plan together, and it's a very, very, very well-written plan. It's the plan. There's no plan that exists that doesn't get changed, and we hope that we don't have to come back, unnecessarily to change it, but we want you to know that all of these things that are in the plan that require town approval, like the sketch I just passed out, to demo the building, you have to get a demolition permit. To install the parking, you have to get permit from the building officials. So we're going to comply with all those things, and we don't want you to think that by approving the plan, we can just plow ahead and do all these things without proper permitting and proper review by the respective town departments and agencies, because I think there's a little confusion about that.
Yes, thank you. I think your comments differ a little bit from what we've heard from legal counsel in what we can or cannot approve.
Could we, perhaps legal counsel and I, see if we can get on the same page about that? Because I don't know that I said anything that Amy's going to disagree with, but if she does, I think you certainly need to know that, and we need to collectively resolve what the legal rights that we have once the plan's adopted. I don't think we're going to be on a different page on that.
Yeah, I'm just suggesting that if there's an aspect of the plan that the board doesn't want to approve, they can approve the plan except for whatever aspect it is they don't want, rather than deny the plan outright.
Well, we can't, there's some things in the plan, we couldn't operate a facility without them. So I don't know how we're going to move forward on that basis. We're submitting an entire plan, we're not submitting a menu.
Understood. Why don't we see if there are any other
Thank you.
questions or comments from board members before we ask the public, which has waited patiently, to speak? Any questions or comments at this point? Robin?
It just comes to mind, why haven't you discussed a parking building instead of this parking sprawl problem?
Hospital doesn't have the resources to do that. I don't know, the only parking building that I know of that's been built south of the airport was the empty parking garage at the train station in Wickford. But parking buildings would cost, I don't know, somewhere around between $60,000 and $100,000 a space. There isn't anybody, hospital would never have the resources to do that. And I don't know whether we could ever get it approved by zoning, but they could never afford that.
Well, if you can't find the land, it might be more worth
Well,
considering.
Well, we think we have found the land, and the issue with the town farm park in the land swap was what values were going to be credited for prior parcel and what appraisal methods were going to be used. And it's my understanding, which is not a decision that gets made here, but I'm happy to share that with you, those issues have been resolved so that we're confident that those appraisal issues have been resolved and that the numbers are going to come in to satisfy the prior approval that the council gave for the land swap. But we're very confident about that. So if that happens, then we'd obviously have to get the proper town approvals to put anything on that parcel. And this plan doesn't give us any right to do that without getting all the proper approvals, as I said a few minutes ago.
It does sound a little
No,
non-transparent here, that you seem to have a plan in place that's not really being shared.
well, no, it's public information. It has been for a long time, but it hasn't been occurred yet. So I'm not sharing anything that I have share, but it's not done yet, and it's done by the town council. It's not done here, so that,
Are we saying that town council has already agreed that they'll agree to this?
no, I'm saying that they previously approved the land swap a long time ago, before this process ever started. They approved the land swap. That's my understanding. Well, that's my understanding, and that's my understanding. That was
I don't
approved a long
believe
time ago.
that's our understanding, and obviously, we haven't been
What?
privy to any detailed retail or real estate analysis as far as that goes, but
No, I understand that, Madam Chair,
Uh,
but that's a council decision.
I'm just thinking maybe it'd be helpful if Mr. Prescott just talked about briefly just where we are with that process.
Certainly.
DEM has recently reached out to the town and arranged or coordinated with us for an additional appraisal to be done of some property that was involved in the land swap decades ago that involved some property at Green Hill. And the National Park Service has indicated that that property, if subject to a proper appraisal, will be considered sort of as part of the total sum of property being exchanged. So there would be Glen Rock that would be going to the town. Green Hill already went to the town, and so there would be a value attached to that, and that previous land swap would be sanctioned, if you will, by the National Park Service. And so what's pending is the appraisal by, the town council has retained Scotty Appraisal to appraise that piece of property, and my understanding is that that appraisal will be completed shortly. At that point, all of the necessary appraisals for the land involved in the land swap will have been complete, and it is my understanding that at that point, DEM will deem the package that needs to go to the National Park Service to be complete, and we'll submit it for approval.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have Mr. Prescott, I have a question. So just to be clear, the land in Green Hill was already swapped previously for a different parking area, and now we're going to use that same old swap again for more parking? You're not giving us additional land. This is the old land, correct?
There was an exchange of property where the hospital ended up with some property in exchange for the Green Hill property. And this gets very complicated because there are a lot of moving pieces. But the sum and substance of it is that the National Park Service and DEM have deemed it appropriate to consider in valuing all the property involved in the land swap, land that was currently acquired, that was previously acquired by the hospital in exchange for property that went to the town. The previous approach had been that that land swap, the exchange of that property was not going to be counted, so to speak, because the National Park Service at the time had not officially sanctioned the land swap, due to error, actually. It was just at some point in the process, whether it was with DEM or National Park Service, somebody just didn't follow through with it. And so that's really an injustice to the hospital, because the hospital gave property to get that piece that would now be double counted against the hospital inappropriately, because it never got credit.
Just to clarify, the Green Hill property was always meant to substitute for the original conversion at Town Farm. The process was just never completed.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
This is a public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Please come up to the mic and state your name for the record. We can't hear you, and the tape won't pick up your comments, so please come up to the mic because we would like to hear what you have to say.
My name is Susan Benson. I live on Hillcrest Road. I am so,
Susan?
Just lower that mic a tiny bit.
All right, Susan, just if you can't hear the echo, the recorder won't pick up, and everything you say will lose its value
And
in the.
we want it to be part of the record.
Thank you.
my name is Susan Benson. I live on Hillcrest Road. And I am so sick and tired of the machinations that has caused this whole situation to come to a head. And I don't want to have to come here again and go through it again and again and again. And all the people on Hillcrest Road agree to it.
Please come up to the mic.
My name is Tom Luther. I live on 36 Hillcrest Road. My question concerns a portion of the master plan, not the particular land swap. I had a question about the positive pressure system that they stated is going to be installed. And my question is, where is that system going to vent? Are the filtration devices there and/or scrubbing systems attached to this system? That's my concern and my question. If there is someone here that has the expertise to answer that.
We'll ask for that response. Is that your only question?
Yes.
Thank you. So is there someone from the hospital who has the expertise to answer this question? If not, we can go on to the next speaker and you can.
Hello, thank you, Aaron Robinson. So I think I want to make sure I'm understanding the section you're referencing relative to positive pressure or negative pressure. Really, the plan speaks to negative pressure that was put in the emergency room. Negative pressure, in fact, we are the only hospital in the state of Rhode Island that put negative pressure in the emergency room. Negative pressure reduces the spread of particle-borne pathogens such as COVID-19 and creates a safer environment in the emergency room. So,
If you're going to ask another question, you'll have to come back up to the mic.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
So, Mr. Robinson? So in that negative pressure system in the ER or the positive pressure system, I think the question is there a filtration system?
yes,
So that the neighborhood isn't inhaling whatever's being drawn in?
absolutely, yes. Yeah, it has to meet rigorous code and regulation from Joint Commission, which is extremely rigorous from a safety perspective. All of the filtration systems that have to be put in our medical grade and have to meet those requirements.
Thank you.
Mr. Luther, does that answer your question? If not, please come back up to the mic, restate your name for the record. Thank you.
Tom Luther, 36 Hillcrest Road. I believe you just said whether it be negative pressure or positive pressure, the filtration systems are there?
Yes.
Negative.
Okay. Thank you. That answers
Thank
my
you.
question.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Hi, my name is Kristen McCabe. I live on 14 Dobson Road. First of all, I think the hospital's great. I've only had great experiences there. I understand the concern with parking. Believe me, I've watched people park up and down Town Farm Road and Dobson Road because there was nowhere else to park. So I get that. I guess my concern is with the plan, a few things specifically. For me, I look out over the ball field. I see, the water, you see the kids playing, whatever. when they build the parking lot, if that goes through, I don't want to look at the cars, eye level. I would like to know that it's below, so you don't, get your whole view eliminated. And I guess the other question or concerns I have are the lighting there. Right now, my bedrooms are upstairs. I can see the lights that are coming from the hospital themselves, and it shines right in. We have room darkening shades, but when lighting gets put around the potential parking lot, those lights are going to be maybe 30 yards from my house. It's going to be a lot brighter than it is now. So again, a concern. I'm not saying that I'm completely against the parking lot, but I do have big concerns. Right now, the way that it's set up, there's a lot of traffic in. There's people sitting, I don't know what they're doing in their cars, and I'm not referencing hospital employees, but you do see employees smoking, you see people milling around. I'm just wondering how that's all going to be contained. People use the garbage cans that are over there by the playground as their personal dump. How is that all going to be managed? So, with that respect, there's a lot of concerns. I also have concerns, okay, you have the master plan where you want a cancer center. What about 10 years from now when you want a dialysis center? And then you want this center and that center. And now, where's all that parking going to go? Are we going to go up? I don't want to be looking at a parking garage. Obviously, the bigger the hospital gets, the more attractive it gets to these big hospital conglomerates. I'm assuming there's a plan that the hospital will be sold. It will no longer be the local community hospital that we love. It will be another Mass General. Again, nothing against Mass General, but it will be a different type of hospital. So what is that going to look like 10 years from now when they want more centers and there isn't parking? And then we start, I don't know, do you park off-site? But I guess there's that concern. And I honestly would love to know that if that becomes a parking lot and the hospital gets sold, that's not going to become a parking garage that I will look at. And that's a huge concern, and I know that's a concern for neighbors. I mean, to look at the water and then look at a parking garage, that's a big difference. I mean, property values will go down. So again, I would love the assurance of knowing, that's not going to happen as everything evolves, because it will. I mean, and again, you look at the photos of the hospital in 1970, you see the dirt around it, you see all this space. And here we are, 50 years later, and we've run out of space. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Question for Amy related to the last series of questions. Would any kind of sale of the hospital, transfer of ownership, that would not render the master plan somehow ineffective, correct?
Right, it's just like any planning or zoning approval. It applies to the property and not specifically the applicant. However, you would think that if the hospital is sold, the new owner or chain might, have different plans than
course.
South County as an independent hospital.
Yes, thanks. I can see you're dying to say something. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to remind everyone that the board members who manage the hospital, oversee the staff, A, they're all volunteers, B, they're all from the community, as you heard earlier from Mr. Matthews today, who's a lifelong Rhode Island resident who lives in Wakefield. What they're trying to do is preserve this hospital as an independent community hospital. If they can't do that, somebody will buy it and come in with whatever their plan is. They're trying really, really hard to do that. They know, as you know, that they're constrained by the land that they own and the small bit of undeveloped land that abuts them. This isn't Providence. So they can't go by the tenements, one of which my grandmother lived in, and knock them down and expand the hospital from Eddy Street to Plain Street, for those of you who know anything about South Providence. They can't do that. They can't go by blocks of houses in this beautiful town. So they're trying to provide services that they can accommodate within existing buildings, which is what this plan is, and within the problems with the parking. And they're doing their very best to do that and to comply and submit a plan that conforms to the ordinance, and then hopefully to implement the plan in a way that the town approves step by step for the different approvals that are necessary. But I just want to emphasize that there's absolutely no discussion at any level by my client about selling the community hospital. But I'm not saying, and no one could say, what will ever happen in the future. Because of, if you follow any of this and you read the paper, the reimbursements that they get from Medicare are lower than Massachusetts and lower than Connecticut. And that's just not your community hospital. That's all the hospitals in Rhode Island. Now, I can't explain to you, unfortunately, why that occurs. But one of the other major hospitals that ran a deficit this past quarter in double-digit millions said that they lose tens of millions of dollars a year because the reimbursements in Rhode Island from Medicare are less than they are in the two neighboring states. That's a bigger problem for a small community hospital because they don't have all the other things that a big, larger, major hospital, like I'll use Mass General because they're not here, would have. So they're trying their best to do that, and we're here to ask for your help. But we recognize that this isn't an ideal situation for the neighborhood. It's not an ideal situation for you. But like all of you, I've been around here since the 70s, and I live in the next town. But it's a lot different place in 2022 than it was in 1972. And with all the visitors that are here and the Rhode Islanders that are here in the summer and everything else, and the people who live in this community, you need and you want a functioning hospital, and you have to trust them to know what they want to offer that meets the needs of our patients in our community. Because when you get sick, everybody's not going to have time to get down to Eddy Street, to Lifespan. So we need a top-notch facility here, and that's what they're trying to do. But they recognize that they can't add things that won't be accommodated with the parking constraints. And you'd have just as much opposition as you'd have if we were coming in with a parking garage. You'd have people coming out from everywhere objecting to that. But there's just not money to do that because it's not affordable within the budget of a community hospital. But we're going to get through this hopefully together and with your help and your direction and get to the other side of this so we can move forward and continue to be a great community partner. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Hi, my name is Sheila Stone. I live right across the street from the hospital at 145 Kenyon Ave. I probably could go on with some of the problems, but what I want to ask about, since it seems as though growth and expansion is the only way forward, it seems as though we're all accepting that is what the hospital must do in order to stay viable. I am curious about how the process went to bring Ortho Rhode Island, which their offices were on High Street, and bring them over to the medical office building, and all of their patients and all of that traffic without more parking. How did that happen? Is that how we got to 94% parking rate, or whatever that's called? I don't know, but I also know as a healthcare provider that all of Rhode Island, we all get lower reimbursement rates, not just the hospital, but all of us. And that's like a different conversation, and unfortunately, the answer to that conversation isn't necessarily parking and let me try to get more CPT codes, get more service codes. But that seems as though, in the moment, because that's the way healthcare is run, that's the only way we're talking about this. And it's like staggeringly concerning to me because I, in no way, shape, or form, prepared to talk from the healthcare provider point of view, and I really don't believe any of you are either. And yet that keeps getting put out here. I mean, if we want to start talking about what happened to South County Hospital's behavioral health program, we can do that. We can do that. Because I have been a mental health counselor in South Kingstown since 2009. And I experienced when they had a full department of prescribers who also did therapy, who also had a supervising psychiatrist. They don't have that anymore. So I'm concerned at sort of like things that keep getting thrown around as we need this in order to remain a community hospital. Essentially, I think most people feel you're trying to achieve the town farm parking lot, which is where I walk my dog every day, in order to make this package look so much more appealing to sell the hospital. Do I want that? No. Did you guys save my mother's life? Absolutely. Was my father on the board for about a bajillion years? He was. And so he certainly has done his service. And I feel as though I am doing a different type of service by living across the street because I have different perspectives. But I just feel as though they are, from what I heard at the beginning of the meeting, they are operating as though the town farm land swap is a done deal, which, by the way, is redonkulous. And you guys aren't. And that somehow we're trying to like go along without being super clear. I mean, Mr. Revens, is that your name? He basically said, no, you cannot pull out a part of our plan because the plan is contingent on other pieces of the plan. Right, that's how I heard it. That makes perfect sense. Like, my budget at home is contingent on other spending line items. I mean, all that makes sense to me. So I don't see how you guys can split that hair. And if the town council has basically, because I know way back when all of this started, it seemed everyone was behaving, including the former town manager, that yes, South County Hospital is a big employer. They absolutely deserve that land to get more parking. And so that's how it all proceeded. And I feel as though we've gotten lost, or at least there seems to be some lack of clarity between the different points of view about whether or not it is approved, because they can't continue to grow without parking. And if they can continue to grow without parking because they're going to do shuttles, why aren't we doing more shuttles now and letting go of the idea of taking away some of the precious green space we have in downtown Wakefield? Have a great day.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Hello, Aaron Robinson again. I did want to address the specific concern that was raised. It's a reasonable question relative to Ortho, Rhode Island, and the increment of, I think what the point that was attempted to be made was that how does that not increase demand for parking when you bring Ortho, Rhode Island over from High Street to campus? And so I'd like to address that first and then just some general comments. So Ortho, Rhode Island wasn't an increment on top of existing medical practices there. We moved multiple medical practices off of campus to create space for services that really need to be closer to campus. So primary care, for instance, that drives a lot of parking demand, was moved off of campus to Narragansett. Primary care really doesn't belong on a hospital campus. It really belongs in the community where folks can access, where there is adequate parking, where you don't have to navigate 94% or whatever we are. There's multi-specialty practices that were moved off, pulmonary, nephrology. Other services were moved off campus, so the net effect of bringing Ortho Rhode Island was neutral in terms of parking demand. That's not an opinion, that is an objective fact that was validated by a parking study, by parking experts, as a part of the master plan that was submitted. So that is the answer to your question. That's how. I would also just like to say, look, we understand the concerns of the neighbors, and we have not been perfect through the years. I will admit that. You know, certainly I will also say that we could have done a better job through the most recent history of engaging our neighbors. I think we have attempted over the last year and a half to improve that. Dave Fonts, who's here tonight, has regularly engaged with our neighbors to listen to their concerns, to walk the campus grounds with them, see things from their view, listen to those concerns, and integrate that into our ongoing operations. And again, it hasn't been perfect, but it is a regular dialogue. Dave, correct? That didn't happen before. We had an open, let's finish this. We had an open forum where we invited the neighbors to come in to look at the plans. There were a lot of misconceptions about what was going to be done if and when we moved forward with Town Farm Park. One was, you're not going to rebuild the playground. We absolutely are going to rebuild the playground. It's going to be an upgraded playground with walking trails. One of the main things that folks said that they like to do in Town Farm Park was walk their dogs, play on the playground. All of that stuff is going to be beautified. And it's going to be improved in terms of functionality for the intended purposes that people say they use it for. And I absolutely understand the concern about obstructing a view. We totally understand that, and we want to have open dialogue about that. The first plan, I will say, that was submitted had the playground in the lower section of the Town Farm Park. After input from the neighbors, they were like, "Why would you put it down there? I like to look out over the salt pond." So based on that feedback, there was a redesign where it was placed at the top part of the elevated portion of Town Farm Park. Just a small example of our intent to continue to engage with our neighbors and the community around how we intend to use that land. If in fact it does move forward, this plan that is before you tonight does not give us a blank check and a complete approval to move forward. We still have to come back with those plans for whatever parking plan that we would have, which would include elevations that get to the views or obstructions of views, that get to lighting. And we've had those conversations about lighting. There is special lighting that points light down instead of points it horizontally. We understand the concerns of the neighbors as it relates to those issues, and we are fully prepared to address those in open dialogue before. Why would we not do that? Knowing we've had, 5-6 meetings, and the same group comes every time with the same concerns. We know what concerns are going to be brought forward. When this comes before the planning board for approval, if and when we get to that point. The approval of this plan tonight does not say that that's going to happen. It's a done deal, and we get to go ahead and do whatever we want.
You just said what I've been thinking is that we have heard repeatedly about the lighting issue and that you understand it. So I guess my question is, what have you done about it, say, in the last 6 months to a year? What will you do about it in the next 6 months to a year so that we don't
So Dave,
continue to hear about?
And I just want to add to that, yes, we have heard that, but I know that every time we have heard that discussion, it's been in the context of a 2-year plan rather than something that can be achieved in 6 months. So I think that's a very good question, Paul.
Yeah, good evening, Madam Chair and Board and staff. David Fonts, Administrative Director for Facilities for the hospital. So as Mr. Robinson said, I have engaged with the neighbors on Hillcrest and so forth. One of the first things that Sue Cohen had showed me, and I was even in one of the family rooms in one of the houses, the lights on the Sturgis building, they shined right into those homes and so forth. Those light fixtures were all changed out probably about 6 months ago, and the lighting for the rest of the lot, per building ordinance and so forth, whatever lighting we change out as part of the master plan would have to be all dark sky, as Mr. Robinson stated, which would alleviate the rest on Dobson Road and so forth.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a question that might also concern you. So I thank you for addressing some of the concerns of the neighbors, but the neighbors had those concerns for many, many years. And it appears to me that the hospital finally addressed their concerns because the hospital was before us looking for something, and we sort of bullied you into it. So if I approve this master plan, and you therefore don't need to come ask us for anything, how do the neighbors find any relief from their, if they have future concerns? Because I understood that they asked and requested things like broken lights to be fixed for years, dumpsters smashing in the middle of the night, and all kinds of other things that were not ever acknowledged from the neighbors until this whole process started a year ago. So what happens in the future if you don't have to come before us and we can't bully you into fixing things for the neighbors?
My engagement with the neighbors, I've been at the hospital about a year now. So I met Sue Cohen. I don't know if she's here tonight. Okay. She volunteers for us. She expressed some concerns. This happened as just a routine of engagement with what I wanted to do also with the neighbors. I previously worked at Miriam Hospital for a number of years. If those of you know Miriam Hospital, it's plump in the neighborhood. We don't have water and woods on. It's basically neighbors all around. I led a community liaison group there. We had a landscape committee, and that's what I've even started on some landscaping that we need to do in the buffer zone. So this to me, I can assure you, I'm not sure what happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but since the 12 months I've been here, I'm doing these things not for the master plan. I'll tell you the truth. They're our neighbors. I lived this in Miriam Hospital. We made tremendous changes there. It was based on the neighborhood input, because we are neighbors. We're all neighbors here. And we need to accommodate our neighbors because we need to live together in the most harmonious way possible. So after this master plan gets approved, whatever improvements get approved, that's something that I would continue for as long as I'm there, because it's a normal, easy process. It's the right thing to do. If I didn't walk the neighbor's hood, ended up in one of the homes looking at the lights, the changes were easy to happen with that being said, and they were small little changes to address that at first. The same thing with the dumpster trucks and all, which has gotten out of hand a couple of times. We've had to call them, but that's just, I'm just telling you truthfully, that's not master plan. That's being a neighbor. That's all it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Can I address part of your question? So I'd also say, in addition to what Dave has mentioned, and he is an earnest guy, but if Dave wins the lottery and he leaves, you still have assurances around the fact that you won't have to bully us into engaging the neighborhood, to use your terminology. We are required to come back in front of the planning board to submit our plan for Town Farm Park if and when we get there. We would have to engage with our neighbors beforehand around that plan. Otherwise, the likelihood of that plan being approved, absent that engagement, would be minimal. So that inherent in the process we have to go through is a need for that engagement. Whether we have a nice guy, which we do, in facilities or not. And last thing I'll say is, look, most of our growth, we talk about growth, most of our growth occurs outside of the hospital. We are a health system. We do home care. We do thousands of home care visits a year. We do behavioral health visits every day. We have a community health team of many individuals that goes out and addresses social determinants of those without means in this community on a daily basis at a subsidy of well over 7 figures. So to suggest that we don't invest in behavioral health is absolutely wrong, and it's inconsistent with our mission and who we are. That's not what I suggested. We are here for the community, and that growth requires staff. That growth requires people to be able to come here to serve you when you come to our emergency room. There have been 400,000 nurses that have left the profession since the pandemic. There are vacancy rates in every hospital in the state up to 30, 40, 50%, which means when you go to the emergency room in Providence, you're going to wait 12 hours, 18 hours, and you may not get seen because they don't have the staff. The median home price in South Kingstown is $500,000. Try buying a house down here at $5 a gallon as an EVS worker or a food services worker. You want staff when you come to our facility. And my guess is every one of you will or have come to our facility. And you want that staff here. And guess what? They don't have to accept shuttle parking at many other places. And we don't have the money for it. It's unsustainable. We are going to lose $10 million this year. Because staff vacancies, traveler expenses to fill those vacancies, we do that for the community at a significant loss. And so we do that in support of this community. And we have explored every option, but it is simply unsustainable to spend $50 million on a parking garage that we don't have and hundreds of thousands of dollars shuttling staff that will not accept it. They will leave, and they will not be there to treat you when you come. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other comments at this point from folks in the audience, we have another one.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Teresa Tansey. I live on Hillcrest Road, 57 Hillcrest Road. And just from witnessing all of this tonight, I've been to several different meetings and watched others online, but I am confused as to what is happening tonight. So before you all enter into that next phase, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page about it. So I heard that we could divide certain sections out, or you all could divide certain sections out from the staff attorney, and that you didn't have to necessarily approve it all at once. I heard that they have to come back to the board for any further alterations, not just to the master plan, but for any changes whatsoever. And I just want to make sure that, because Mr. Rabbit had also said that this was an internal decision and that the planning board could internally make a decision, and then it would need town council approval. So I've heard not a person speak without being interrupted by someone else to counter what that person said. So I'm just wondering if we could get some of these answers to these questions. And someone had mentioned something about shuttle limits by the town. I'm not sure what that was in reference to. I think it may have been Mr. Rabbit. But I'm interested in finding out what those permitting issues or limitations may be, because I believe that parking is not free, and that cost has to be borne by someone, and that would either be the hospital, or it would be the neighbors, it would be the community, the loss of property value, as those who live on Dobson have said, the quality of life for those who are in the immediate vicinity, and the fact that the town council now is investing ARPA money into building pocket parks within our town, because they understand the value of having those small parks nestled within our community, and the tremendous value that they bring, particularly one that's on the head of the bay with this tremendous view that we have here. So I just wanted a couple of clarifying points. And I do have to admit that Dave has been awesome. I have not been able to join on any of those tours or talks. They always seem to be at the time we're meeting at work, but he's been absolutely tremendous. And I hope you win the lottery, but I hope you train the person coming beyond you, because he has already made a difference, and I can't tell you the number of times that his name comes up in our neighborhood talks and discussions. He's really been a great representative and community member, building for those of us. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, do you think you could answer some of Ms. Tanzi's questions relative to the changes and internal decisions, meaning internal staff decisions versus anything that may or may not come before the board and thus the public? As also, she asked about shuttle limitations by South Kingstown as well.
So I will take the low-hanging fruit, shuttle limitations. Again, there are no shuttle limitations on the hospital as it relates to their ability to utilize that type of transportation/parking model. The only issue we have is if they were applying for any permits, that in the permit application process, that their parking analysis has to address the demands of what they're proposing and how they're satisfying them. And like I mentioned, they could be internal or external. Internal would be how are they doing it on their campus. External would be how are they doing it off-site. And our regulations refer to solidifying a lease for where those spaces are, and then the provisions for the shuttle service to and from that location. With regards to the permitting process, again, what I mentioned earlier is there are some items that can, based on their scale, can be done administratively. The other aspects are non-administratively, so if it requires a zoning permit, which potentially requires DPR review, it comes back to the planning board. But it's not coming back to the planning board for determination of whether or not it should go there. It's coming back to the planning board on does it meet the regulatory standards contained within your regulations. So if a parking lot comes back to you, it's not determining whether it should or shouldn't go there. It's determining whether that parking lot meets the regulatory standards. So if it requires a landscape island once between every 12 spaces, and they show it once every 14, they needed to request a waiver, and that waiver, according to your regulations, was supposed to be identified in the institutional master plan. So without playing that forward, I'm not sure you could grant the waiver because it's not in the institutional master plan. Or make a recommendation that zoning can grant that waiver because it's not in the institutional master plan. So again, there's some clarity that needs to be done on their conceptual parking so that you don't have to identify potential waivers that may need to be requested in order to build out that schematic. But again, if it's a dumpster, they may be able to go to the building official and put a new dumpster in so long as it's in an enclosure and it doesn't run afoul of any regulatory standard, and it doesn't trigger an additional review by the planning board. So again, some of it is order of magnitude, but our direction is given to us within the zoning code and our own land use application processes.
Thank you, Jamie. If there are no further comments from folks in the audience, I think it would be helpful for planning board members to share their thoughts. I thought I would start with a few. One is that I agree with Jamie that there needs to be greater clarification and more specifics with regard to the whole parking lot. I believe someone earlier this evening said it was the elephant in the room, and obviously it's a major issue. I think the board wants to feel comfortable that there is a process in place by which various scenarios can be addressed. And I think that we would like to see a process that allows for review by the planning board, not for the proverbial dumpster example that Jamie has made, but certainly things related to parking. I don't think that the board has an issue with internal changes to the structures, as we have stated in previous meetings, but again, what is the outcome of those changes, if that impacts the ability to park or not to park? I know that in one meeting, Mr. Revens said to us that they had plenty of parking. And then when I asked the question, then why do you need the town farm park? His answer was, we want to have something in our back pocket. I think that the planning board should have the absolute ability, as well as the public, to allow for a development plan review for the town farm park, if that comes to fruition. And as legal counsel stated earlier, I would feel more comfortable not having the reference to the town farm park within a decision that we might make, as that should be something that would be a future decision by the town council and the various agencies involved in that. Again, Susan's comment about what recourse do the neighbors have if this doesn't come before this board again. Not that we need to micromanage every little detail, that's why we went through this process of the institutional master plan. But things that have a major impact, I think, are important. And Mr. Fox mentioned living in a harmonious process. That's really important. The work that's been done in the last year and a half with the neighbors obviously is long overdue, but it would be advisable that there is a mechanism by which that kind of collaboration can occur with the neighbors. The last thing we want to have is a master plan that is approved and the neighbors no longer have a voice, or the public doesn't have a voice in the issue. So those are my initial thoughts. I would like to probably have staff clarify additions that should be made or clarifications that should be made within the master plan that would allow for a better analysis and various scenarios for parking, so that we could feel more comfortable with that. Paul?
A question for the town engineer regarding the proposed parking lot. I'm assuming this would need some sort of CRMC review for stormwater management, or is that still DEM in this area?
I'll answer only because I've been reviewing it. Mark Comboy is our new town engineer, just so you're all aware. But yeah, generally I think that it might, or will. I think it will. I know that early on, it would have been a couple years ago, maybe more, that we had talked about some other improvements that might happen here. And I believe that there were discussions with CRMC at that time. Maybe a few years ago, it was when it was a different engineer involved. But if it doesn't, it doesn't. It's up to, it'd be up to CRMC whether they feel it's jurisdictional or not. I know that there will be discharge to, there could potentially be impacts to the body of water that sits on the back side of the DPS building, but I believe that it would be jurisdictional to CRMC.
So if not, this would primarily be a town review?
It would be.
The development plan. Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts from this evening? Susan?
Thank you. Thank you. I do have some thoughts. So having read the document, I recognize that you would like more parking, but I don't find in the document a compelling rationale for needing more parking. The 94% number that keeps getting thrown around appears to be an isolated period one afternoon on the busiest day of the year, but that other times during the year, there was adequate parking. If indeed you can identify specific times of the year or of the week that you have parking crunches, cannot some little scheduling things just sort of alleviate that problem? If you're basing this on a traffic engineer finding one moment that it was really bad, I don't feel comfortable just taking you at your word that you need more parking. It would be nice to have, and I also do remember Mr. Revan's comment that they didn't need the parking, but any institution would be foolish not to snatch any land that became available in the neighborhood. So that is stuck out in my mind for a year now, that this just seems a little disingenuous to me, that you need the parking as opposed to want some extra land in the neighborhood. I am concerned that this master plan doesn't seem to offer a plan B. You've made the assumption that Town Farm will indeed become available to you, but not offered a plan B. You've got all your eggs in this one basket, and there are still a number of hurdles to go through in order to have Town Farm to be developed. And that includes the National Park Service and the Town Council, and I hate to say maybe a little bit of the court of public opinion, because I've never to date met a single member of this town that thinks that this is an acceptable idea. That I think that you are potentially going to anger and upset not just the neighbors, but many people in this town. And I don't think that you either you don't understand or you don't mind. But in our position here, we're approving something that we know in advance is going to infuriate a lot of people, and I can't find the compelling reason that you actually need this property to be developed. And I want to see a plan B. What if the town council says no? There's no other plan in your document here for what you will do in exchange. You say that shuttling will work, and then you said shuttling won't work. You don't seem to have another plan. But then furthering that, 20 years from now, once you have this parking lot and you want to add, somebody else earlier said dialysis, that's a great example. If you want to add some other service, we're going to be in the exact same position again 20 or 30 years from now, and again with no place to expand. So I think this is a Band-Aid for now, and especially if growth is your goal, and I think also some folks alluded to tonight that maybe improving your services you have as opposed to grow, grow, grow might be a better solution, though I'm not your business manager. But I'm not understanding this basically temporary fix, taking away one of our town parcels. Sorry, I've got notes here, I've written all over the place. Okay, and then lastly, I will at this point say that if I'm not allowed to parse out a portion of the master plan, then I won't be voting in favor of the master plan, because I think that a lot of the things you have planned are wonderful. I think they're great for the hospital. If you want to change your facade and move an operating room, more power to you. I recognize, and I've talked to our planning staff about our role here, and I know that we're not supposed to be making policy decisions, but we are planning our town, and I can't in good conscience vote for the portion of this plan that paves Town Park, especially since I very recently, sort of accidentally, got my hands on a document that shows significant historical, archaeological finds in that space. And I wasn't given this document. The hospital didn't share this document. The town council hasn't seen the document. I don't think anyone has seen the document. And so for me, I feel there's a little bit of, I don't know, something going on over here that feels a little shady to me. And I think that if you want Town Farm and we can make an educated decision that it's good to go, that's okay, but not disclosing documents that are potentially relevant to the decisions that people make feels like there's just some sort of little cover-up or some sleight of hand going on. And in fact, since I'm on the roll, and I wasn't even really going to talk
Madam
about
Chair?
this tonight.
If I just may, you're in the public hearing process. I'm not sure if it's the time to opine on your position on how you would vote.
Jamie, I think that in this case, I have asked board members to relay their thoughts as far as what we've heard tonight, what we are potentially going to be considering either tonight or sometime in the future. So I'd like Susan to finish her comments.
Am I okay?
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So just to share this, this was the Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission. We concur with your conclusion that the project area contains a potentially significant Narragansett site, quite possibly an extension of the nationally significant Salt Pond site. The number of features found suggests a similar intensive occupation of the South County Hospital site and heightens our concern regarding the possibility of Narragansett burials on the property. It goes on to say, based on these findings, the archaeological site within the project area appears potentially eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. As such, Gray and Pape recommends that the project avoid ground-disturbing activities that could reach depths below the topsoil or plow zone, either with or without gravel fill overlying it. So I want more of a conversation about this before I sign any document that says that I give my blessing to a parking lot in this space. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. Robin?
I would just share that I thought it would have been good to invite planning board members to these meetings that you've had, that we could have a window into what kinds of remediation was offered or carried out. I think that Ms. Tansey is the only person I've ever heard speak in support from the immediate community.
And Robin, just to clarify, were you talking about the meeting with the neighbors? Because we were sent an email, I believe, with regard to that meeting. It wasn't a formal invitation, but I believe we were sent some kind of electronic notice.
Madam Chair, in the institutional master plan, it is intended for that meeting to be between the hospital and the neighborhood. And the invitations went to the members of the neighborhood.
Yeah, we were not.
Planning board staff was apprised of the hospital's intention to schedule and hold that meeting.
Ah, I see.
And I think that in your institutional plan, there should also be a continuing thread with the community and their needs and wants and your responses and action dates so that they continue to have your ear. I think that would be being a good neighbor.
Yes, once we turn the disco music off, yes, certainly.
Just a couple of quick things. I want to caution everybody in this room about discussion of this archaeological report. The Narragansett tribe is absolutely furious that this is being discussed in public spaces, and is livid that this report has been shared outside of the Historical Commission and those who are supposed to have it. It places the artifacts actually at jeopardy for people to be discussing this in the public realm. And we have had to assure the tribe that we did not release that report to the public. And I was on the phone with the tribe, and they are quite upset about it. And there are federal laws that govern whether or not those kinds of reports can be made public and under what circumstances. And I strongly disagree with the assertion that anything shady is going on in that regard, that we are hiding anything. That's offensive. And in fact, we have done just the opposite. We've responded to the tribe's concerns that somebody let that report out when it shouldn't have been. I also want to say that I'm highly concerned, and I suggest on behalf of the hospital and the health system that you confer with legal counsel, because the majority of the grounds that I'm hearing suggested as reasons to vote against the plan are inconsistent with the law. And it really is not for this board to determine what constitutes the reasons to vote no against this plan. That is set by the law and the ordinances in advance. And there are standards that apply. And when you articulate reasons such as the hospital's plans might be adverse to public opinion, you are straying, in my view, far from what would constitute legal grounds for voting one way or the other on an institutional master plan. The examples that have been cited with regard to the development of Town Farm Park really make the case, because we have said right from the beginning that we would never develop that park without going through whatever process is required by law. And as Mr. Robinson said, we would be highly ill-advised not to involve the neighborhood in the development of those plans. We don't have those plans yet. And we are not legally required to have those plans at this juncture to get approval of our master plan. That is simply the law. There is a provision in the ordinance that states that with regard to buildings, if we don't have plans, we can come before the board, get our institutional master plan approved, and when we do have drawings, submit them to the administrative officer, who reviews them for consistency with the plan. When it comes to demolishing a storage shed and putting parking in, we have to pay attention to what is required to get that permission. And so I really caution the board and hope that the board will listen to legal counsel and follow the law and not hold up this master plan based on considerations that are really beyond the scope of what should be before the board.
Thank you, Mr. Prescott. I would just like to point out that only one board member has said anything about disapproval of a plan. The rest of us have asked questions relative to the plan, its implementation, and how that might work. And I don't believe that anyone on the board is aware of this archaeological study, and we don't know how that all pertains to. This is the first. Right, but this is the first that the rest of us, this is not anything that was provided by staff. I rather doubt that staff has
Madam
any
Chair,
knowledge.
to clarify, that archaeological report was not distributed to the planning board.
Exactly.
Nor did Mrs. Axelrod receive that from the planning board. It's my understanding she went through what she deemed as proper channels in making a request with a state agency for a copy of that plan, which was potentially given to her.
And it would be most helpful if there could be a conversation that occurs between your varied legal counsel members and our legal counsel as far as what our authority is with regard to any modifications that we might feel necessary to this master plan. Obviously, parking has been a topic of discussion tonight, and if the board could be in a position in which we feel comfortable that there are enough checks and balances within the plan so that the board, the community, is made aware of any major changes. Again, back to Jamie's dumpster analogy, we don't need to know if you're changing a dumpster. But something that is impactful and significant, I think we have been very clear from the very beginning that we would like to be sure that we're made aware of those things. And there is a difference between a public hearing and a planning board review and an internal staff review. And clarification of those things is helpful to everyone. Paul?
Madam Chair, just for clarity, so long as the dumpster's in the proper enclosure.
Of course, of course.
And not on fire. I'm just curious if anyone knows, Mr. Prescott, perhaps you know, a parking lot is a limited disturbance to the site versus, say, digging 30 feet down to put in a foundation. And I wonder, is there any language in the report or from HPHC that makes a distinction about that? Because it seems like it would matter. In your favor, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There are approaches to putting in a parking lot that prevent and protect from ground disturbances below a certain level. And what may have to happen is that fill may have to be put on top of existing loam and earth structure to allow the construction of the parking lot without digging into the ground. And by operation of law, a memorandum of understanding between the Historical Commission and the tribe and South County Health would have to be entered into before a shovel went into the ground. So there's a variety.
And that would be considered protective of the site for some future.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Exactly.
Just to add to this, that's why this isn't supposed to be public, so we get it crystal clear. The Indians want to preserve those sites, and all of us have been involved in this before. And the last thing that's going to preserve it is telling the whole world that's out there so people can start going around there with their shovels and digging around trying to see what they can find under the surface of the ground. And that's why it's not public. That's why it wasn't disclosed. And it has no business being read into a public record at this meeting so that it can be in the newspaper and everybody can know that maybe they can go out there and look for artifacts or arrowheads or burials or clay pots or anything else that might be part of the Indian tradition that was in this area. And it had no place being in here. And I understand that the board member maybe wasn't aware of that, but the idea that the leading community hospital in South County would be hiding something, refusing to disclose something, trying to do something sneaky or nefarious, it's outrageous. It's outrageous to suggest that as a member of a public body. It's inappropriate, it's improper, it's not accurate,
okay,
and it's way out of the realm of.
It doesn't appear that Ms. Axelrod did this with any malintent. Again, it's important that the board has all the information, all the relevant information at its disposal. I understand your analogy to the pyramids, actually, but again, I think going forward, there needs to be conversations had between staff, legal counsel. I think the board would be much more comfortable. I think, Jamie, you have a pretty good idea of what our concerns are. There was a pretty thorough review done of the initial master plan, and then we really haven't had the conversation for some time.
Madam Chair, I have close to 6 pages of notes. As the discussion was occurring, I was also noting the time that discussion was occurring so we could refer to the recordings on the subject matter. And again, I think some of the discussion tonight, I would hope that the hospital is not surprised by. They have been discussed over the last 12 plus months, and I think a lot of it is similar questions and formats that need additional clarification, and that clarification can be supplied with additional dialogue with the hospital and potential revisions to their institutional master plan. Some of the philosophical questions may remain to be philosophical, and there aren't answers to those because those are opinion. And the only thing we can do as your staff is work with the hospital to try and clarify as many questions that the boards have in the most positive manner that's available to us. And there may be some instances where the hospital agrees to disagree, and, that's okay. But there is a process that you're involved in, and I hope you have confidence in staff that will work with the hospital to try and address those. I did take some notes with regards to next steps. If you just bear with me for a moment. And Mr. Parker may have some follow-up in a moment. Again, as I started off this evening, it would be our recommendation to continue this public hearing to October 25th, 2022, to continue to work with the planning board staff and the hospital to adjust the IMP, which is the institutional master plan, in response to the planning board's comments this evening and questions and discussion. I absolutely, as your planning director, appreciate the conversation this evening. I'm just trying to keep you within the confines of what the regulations provide. And Susan, to my comments to you, there was no intent or ill will with regards to your statements. I'm always concerned when during public comment people are stating a position and how they may vote versus asking the questions they're trying to ask so the applicant and staff can try and address those. I'm used to position statements during commission discussion. So again, that's my kind of upbringing as a planner. In addition to that, I think based on the discussion that as your planning director, I would feel comfortable trying to develop the framework for a motion for your potential consideration at your October meeting. Our hopes would be to try and get that to you. It may not be immediately with your agenda a week before, but potentially that Friday, so you would have it over the weekend. But again, there's a lot of moving parts, and I'm sure the hospital is going to supply information that we're going to review and respond to. So again, that would be my intent, in essence. Recommend the continuation of the hearing, continue to work with the hospital as an applicant, and also based on the discussion this evening to try and format the framework for a motion.
Thank you, Jamie. I think that's a very good summary. Any other thoughts from board members?
And I know
I have one. I would just like to clarify that indeed the planning staff, and I don't know who else has this document, but I received this directly from HPHC. I had called them because I knew there was a historic cemetery on the hospital site, and I called just to ask for any further information about that cemetery, and she said, oh, and there's that archaeological site too. So I put in a request for a public document, and that's where I received this document from, was through the public information request through the HPHC. It didn't come from staff or any other person in the town. And I apologize also for getting a little too excited, and I'm sorry about that. But, yeah, sorry.
Anything else from board members? Jay?
I just wanted to take this time while we have interested parties in the room to understand some of the misconceptions or concerns that everyone might have, specifically in regards to improvements. So consider the institutional master plan as conceptual. You have an idea, they've laid out their ideas of what their plan is for the next 10 years, this is what they want to do. What Mr. Rabbit was explaining before was as applications come into us, they will be reviewed based on their impact, much like any other project comes in with town. So if they're going to switch out a building that is formerly, I don't know, a cardio unit that requires 40 spaces for parking, and they're going to replace it with a dialysis center or something like that, we would look at it and say, what's the requirement? If it's 50 and 50, they just we allow them to make the switch without a problem. With the picture that's on the screen, this is representative of the demolition of the storage shed. That is creating additional parking spaces. In accordance with our zoning ordinance, development plan review is required when there's an addition of 5 additional parking spaces. Clearly, that's more than 5. That would come back before the town for approvals. That plan does not show sufficient design to allow us to make a confirmation that it complies with the parking requirements. The spaces are 9 feet by 18. There's sufficient landscaping. So that's an example of one that would return to us. The plan for the new larger parking lot, it shows trails, it shows some landscaping, it shows lines, it fails to show detail. That creates more than 5 spaces. That would come back for development plan review. So but there is a little bit of leeway on the administrative side when Jamie, the administrative officer, assesses it to determine if it falls in that category that it's worthy of additional or requires additional review along the lines of how we currently operate today. If we were to get an application that would come in similar to this, that's not related to the hospital, it would go through the same process. Those processes would be adhered to. And in sitting here listening to the conversations, a lot of topics have been touched, and I think it's helpful to understand that there are checks and balances along the way, and that approval of the master plan does not give them carte blanche approval for everything they show. They still have to go into the details that are required by our regulations to follow that through.
And again, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director, I think Mr. Evans may have discussed this, and this isn't an invitation for him to come back up to the microphone, but he did it during the text amendment process that, to Jay's point, the institutional master plan is different than the way other applicants are handled in the town. They are required, unlike Shaw's or a shopping mall or a CVS, to actually discuss with you what they're intending to do over the next 5 years. When they didn't have that discussion about an expansion of a facility, internal or external to the hospital, there were potential ramifications to that. The primary ramification in their case is parking. So if there are ramifications to that parking, they're required by the institutional master plan to conceptually show you how they would handle that. What they have shown you as it relates to parking, and I discussed this earlier, is really 3 alternatives. 25 spaces where their shed is, 100+ spaces on town farm, and a shuttle/valet program. Those are the 3 options they're showing you as it relates to their potential expansion or modifications to their campus over the next 5 years. CVS could be planning an expansion that's coming to you 6 months from now, but they're not required to tell you that or show you that until they submit an application. To Jay's point, it doesn't exonerate them from having to go through an approval process. This is actually almost an additional layer to your regulatory review that requires them to show you what they're planning over 5 years versus just incrementally coming in with a change. They're actually, the intent of the regulation is to drive them to look long-term at how their campus grows, which they're attempting to do in their IMP. So again, they're conceptual to address their expansion plans. Because if you remove the 2 parking areas, the question the planning board would be is how are you going to accommodate all the expansion and where are the people going to park? So they've conceptually shown you where they could go and how they would comply with zoning requirements. We have some details to work out.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Jay, for your summary and your mention of checks and balances. I think that's something that's obviously of concern to everyone. And Jamie, your reference to the fact that the plan must be dynamic in order to succeed. And of course, the reference to Mr. Revan's favorite analogy of Shaw's and the other supermarkets, and how the hospital has to go above and beyond that particular standard. If there are no other comments, would someone like to make a motion to continue this hearing to our October 25th meeting?
Before we make the motion, I think Mr. Abbott mentioned that there was, or that there will be some discussion. I know it's not a palatable alternative for the hospital, that there be some discussion of shuttle parking in here, or that we're satisfied that the plan offers some solutions, whether or not they work out or not.
So I'm comfortable with the institutional master plan referencing one of their options being to shuttle.
Does it, I was just looking quick, okay.
So the caveat on that is it has to be a shuttle location that meets, you can't just say, we've leased half the parking spaces at Shaw's. Well, Shaw's got credit for those parking spaces for Shaw's parking, not to sublet them to another entity. So there are some moving components to that, but if, to Jay's example, there was 50 and there were 60 instead of the 50 he mentioned, so there's a net of 10. If they provided a lease in Narragansett for 10 parking spaces and solidified that they were going to shuttle them back and forth, as the administrative officer, they met the criteria contained in the zoning regulations, and we would sign off on their ability to make that change internal to their hospital.
So are we?
The reference is in the
Plan
IMP.
B or not?
Plan B for shuttling completely?
Well, I think that was Plan B, assuming for whatever reason that Town Farm couldn't or didn't or wouldn't happen. Are we asking for a Plan B in the master plan or not?
That, from my perspective, is an option of the applicant.
Okay. Thank you.
No further comments? Would someone like to make that motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to continue to October
25th.
25th, thank you, 2022.
We have a motion from Paul. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Is there further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. That is the last item, other than we need someone to volunteer for the TRC, and I believe Paul had volunteered last time and there was not a meeting, is that right?
I fulfilled my obligation.
Oh, you did fulfill your
So,
obligation.
Mr. Jordan stated he would
I'll do it.
do it again.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Do we have a date on that for Paul? And time preference?
In the morning.
Good job holding your.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion from Paul, second. To adjourn. Second from Susan. All those in favor say aye.
Susan, have a drink.
All those in favor say aye. 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 Motion carries.